So a year ago now, we looked at a pair of brand new forms for Ichigo and Rukia, introduced as part of the mobile game Bleach Brave Souls' 10th anniversary, which is pretty incredible to be honest. These new divine forms were called Soul Ascension, and seemingly transformed Ichigo and Rukia into a pair of pretty spectacular deities at the absolute height of their respective power. These original designs, much like the Hogyoku Enhanced and Beyond Bankai forms before them, in my opinion remain one of Brave Souls' biggest draws, and it's part of why the game has been so enduring, as even a decade later, the game is still capable of taking characters to places that no other piece of Bleach media possibly could. During that video, I said that I hoped this would signify the start of a new series of original designs coming to the game once again, and, well, it didn't. Until now. For Bleach Brave Souls' 11th anniversary has now arrived and brought with it two more totally new, godly forms as part of the Soul Ascension series, this time for the 4th Espada Ulquiorra and the 6th Espada Grimmjow. And I've got to say, before we really dive in to take a closer look at these, that this Ulquiorra form has dethroned Rukia's as my absolute favourite Soul Ascension form yet. He looks like a boss ripped straight out of Dark Souls, and I am absolutely here for it. But enough of that. Let's take a closer look at these new forms and see what we think. What references and details can we spot within, and what's the lore behind them? So let's take a look. Of course, before we get started, we are on the brink of the 1000-Year Blood War Arc Core 4 arriving this Saturday at the time of recording, so it's never been a better time to support the channel than right now. Consider doing so over on Patreon, down the link in the description below, where you can help support the channel just like everyone is doing in the credits right now. It's greatly appreciated. It does go a very long way, so thank you all so very much. So first up, we've got to take a look at Ulquiorra's newest transformation. As I said, this isn't just my favourite of this latest pair, but it's my new favourite of the bunch so far. As far as I'm concerned, this is a top-tier original design from Bleach Brave Souls. One thing that's interesting to note before we begin is that clearly this idea of Soul Ascension is race agnostic, as now both Shinigami and Arankar have been shown to be capable of achieving it, which means it either goes beyond their individual innate powers, or it's more just a blanket term for some kind of, well, soul ascension, a transformation of their very soul itself at the foundation of their being. If you ask me, the best thing about this is that it opens the door to transformations for characters like the Sternritter too, and I really wouldn't be surprised if next we get something like Bambietta and Asnod, for example, which I'd love to see, though, as I'll mention a bit later, there is a bit of talk already as to who the next characters may be who are receiving these forms, potentially at least. But in the future, I could absolutely see popular Sternritter like those two receiving these forms. Anyway, Ulquiorra looks truly like an angel in this form. Well, a fallen angel of some description at least. The in-game lore for this new form describes it as such. In this special form attained through a new power, Ulquiorra is clad in chaotic shadow that eclipses the light. He leads the way into the unknown, bringing nothing but destruction and chaos in his wake. So that's a pretty awesome description, and it does share one crucial element with both Ichigo and Rukia's before it, the fact that he acquired this form through attaining a nebulous new power. What said new power is remains unclear, though we'll dive into that in a second, but it is presumably of the same source as Ichigo and Rukia's, though not necessarily. I've got to be honest, this description is very interesting to me, and it paints a picture of a truly intriguing form for Ulquiorra. And speaking of the source of this new power, let's deal with the elephant in the room. And spoilers incoming, by the way, for the first 3 episodes of the 1000-Year Blood War Arc Core 4. I certainly wasn't expecting it until I read that description. This description mentions chaos multiple times, and usually I wouldn't think twice about it. However, episode 3 of Core 4 reveals that black, the colour black, is the colour of chaos, and of the Soul King's own power. And here, Ulquiorra is clad in a chaotic shadow. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but it is interesting all the same. Could this new power they attain, or at least Ulquiorra attains, be related or be the Soul King's power outright, or some version of it anyway? Anyway, I like the notion that it was only after attaining said power that Ulquiorra was suddenly clothed in this all-consuming darkness, meaning presumably that everything beneath said darkness here is meant to be Ulquiorra's true or at least previous self. And I love how that is portrayed. You know, beneath the black shadow, his body appears to be made of a crystalline gold of sorts, and there's a kintsugi-like effect where veins of gold can be seen running beneath the darkness where it splits and fractures, where it hasn't quite fully taken hold. Unsurprisingly, the core of the design centers around Ulquiorra's heart, from where he seems to be channeling his power. Interestingly, this same core is replicated along his wings, which now sprout from his lower back. And it's interesting too as well that despite the overall design, despite the fact that Ulquiorra is being swallowed up essentially by this chaotic shadow, that his core has remained free. Speaking of which, let's take a closer look at the design itself and see if we can't pick up on any references or hidden details. In his Soul Ascension form, Ulquiorra's hair has grown extremely long and is clearly turning white at the tips. Based on what we just read, does this mean the black of his hair in this form isn't his true hair colour, but is instead the darkness spreading over Ulquiorra's original hair now that he has attained this new power, this new shadow? Interestingly, the same was also kind of true of Ichigo's hair as well in his 10th anniversary iteration, but there, I put that down to it being the influence of Zangetsu. This idea that the shadow is covering Ulquiorra can of course be seen all over this design, from the almost cowl-like collar that now encloses upon his jaw, to the armoured plating running along his horns. Something I've actually noticed that again I'm sure must just be a coincidence, is that I can't help but feel like this form really kind of comes across as a corrupted sequel of sorts to Ulquiorra's Hogyoku enhanced form. Because there, Ulquiorra had white hair. Here, it seems like he has white hair as well, but it's now being consumed by the darkness. Unless, of course, it's going the other way, but that doesn't seem to really make sense when you consider the theme of this form. Anyway, in that last form, his horns were an ethereal, flaming green power. Here, they seem to kind of be the same, but that green light is now being encased within a firm black armour. They also both play with the same idea that Ulquiorra's chest is now a gaping cavity that's filled with power. Ultimately, I don't think they are truly connected, outside of both of them being forms for Ulquiorra, but it is cool nonetheless. In his hand, Ulquiorra wields a lance, because of course he does, since he uses lances made of energy in his Resurrection. Here, though, the lance does appear to be corporeal, and is almost entirely consumed by darkness as well, though the tip is still completely gold, with a prominent green crystal perched at the summit. I also love the detail that Ulquiorra's body appears to be almost like a construct now, as he no longer has any legs or maybe even a lower half. Instead, there's just a void where the rest of him should be. And I kind of like that, because I guess outside of the general imagery of the darkness, there isn't really that much here that seems to play back into Ulquiorra's aspect of death, nothingness, emptiness, the void, that sort of thing. So it could be that his entire body is now a void, there's nothing really left inside underneath the shadow, which is kind of a cool idea. By the way, I can't help but notice similarities between the wings in this form and those of Aizen's monster form. They're both fleshy and pale, and feature kind of grisly openings on the inside skin, though Aizen's openings were his eyes, while Ulquiorra's appear to be additional versions of his core that now seemingly powers him. With his special ability Luz del Final, or Light of the End, Ulquiorra closes his wings, at the same time completely blotting out the sunlight and covering the world in darkness, which itself is a cool visual, because again it plays into the idea that Ulquiorra's own body is struggling to hold back the shadow, as you can see all over him. And then upon closing his wings, it's like he's accepting the shadow's control, and the darkness is allowed to fully take root. And upon opening them again, a new light now appears in the sky, an ominous, sinister green light, one that rains power down across the world. The rain could be a reference to Ulquiorra's resurrection ritual, wherein he rains black Reiatsu from the sky, but either way it is a cool-looking power for sure. The entire design revolves around the theme of dark, overpowering light, and the light trying desperately to cling on and break through the shadows. It's totally possible it's a reference to Ulquiorra himself, who was born completely in the dark, in a pitch-black pit in Waco Mundo, and who only really managed to find some semblance of light right at the very end of his life. To understand what this form truly represents for the character, we do need to understand and know the nature of Soul Ascension itself, which we don't really. Is this Ulquiorra were he never to have met Ichigo and Orihime and to have then acquired a greater power? As I said earlier, possibly even the power of Rayo, though I appreciate that's quite a stretch. Either way, I can't state how awesome I think this form really is. This is a lot cleaner than Ichigo's form, which I did also like, and in my opinion feels more in line with the elegance of Rukia's form to me. Before we continue, if you want to see more Bleach videos every single week, if you want to help support the channel, one of the absolute best ways you can do that, especially as we move into the 1000-Year Blood War Arc Core for the busy season, one of the best ways is by hitting subscribe. It is easy, it is free, and it makes a big material difference. I'd love to reach 300,000 subs. It's only going to be possible with your help, so do consider doing that today. Moving on, next up we have Grimmjow's new form, which I like, but I don't like it quite as much as I do Ulquiorra's. The intricacies of this form feel a little harder to pin down in my opinion, but I'll give my take on it all the same. The in-game lore describes this form as such, reading, "In this special form attained through a new power, Grimmjow is brimming with a burning intensity. He charges headlong into the fray, bringing nothing but destruction and chaos in his wake." So as you can see, the final line there is identical to the one found in Ulquiorra's description about the two of them bringing destruction and chaos in their wake. And so therefore, where destruction and chaos are concerned in these two lore snippets, I think it's reasonable to assume they must refer to Grimmjow and Ulquiorra respectively, which is reinforced by the fact that destruction is Grimmjow's aspect of death. But then why the focus on the aspect of death for Grimmjow and not for Ulquiorra? Again, it's kind of interesting that these descriptions do seem to therefore equate the colour of black to that of chaos, as it only specifically seems to be referring to Ulquiorra, but I digress. In a sense, though, this does kind of throw a wrench into my idea that they are wielding the Soul King's power, at least for everyone but Ulquiorra, I suppose. Instead, I can't help but go back to one of my earlier theories that I mentioned at the start of this video, that the new power attained to achieve Soul Ascension actually differs from character to character, and no two characters attained the same power, whatever it may be. Anyway, I don't personally feel this form quite comes together as well as Ulquiorra's, nor do I think it has as cohesive a through line. That's obviously just my opinion. It kind of feels like Ulquiorra was maybe designed first, and then they designed Grimmjow to try and achieve a similar look and feel. What I mean is, where Ulquiorra has a pair of wings that obviously fit the character perfectly, that idea stems from an evolution of Ulquiorra's own designs, Grimmjow then has flaming hair to achieve the same effect. More so than Ulquiorra's form, Grimmjow's kind of feels like it could be a Segunda Etapa, or maybe one step beyond a Segunda. In that sense, it feels much more closely related to Pantera than Ulquiorra's does to Murcielago. Whereas I kind of thought originally the Hogyoku enhanced version of Ulquiorra felt like the follow-up from Segunda, whereas Ulquiorra's newest form is further removed still, as I mentioned a moment ago. Anyway, in this form, Grimmjow's hair resembles that of Pantera, until it doesn't, transforming into a cloak of fiery, bright pink energy. He also has a similar mask fragment to Pantera here, being an evolved form of the kind of small crown that he wore on his forehead, which again is kind of interesting because this whole form feels like a Pantera reference, and there's very little, I would say, of Grimmjow's base form here at all. To be fair, there are elements of Grimmjow's base design here as well. The more human side of this form, for example, the exposure of much of his torso, that does feel like a callback to his base form, and yet he now has armor-plated gauntlets that again resemble his arms in his resurrection, including the bladed elbows affixed to his forearms, and new armoured pauldrons on his shoulders. I do like that the scar he received from Ichigo's initial Getsuga is now emblazoned upon his flesh as a strange pink marking, as though whatever this new power is that's taken hold realizes that said scar is now truly as much a part of Grimmjow as anything else. The fact that he has a similar marking on his left arm is interesting too. Of course, his arms were also wounded by Ichigo's Getsuga, though it was mostly here, and they didn't sustain a scar in the same way his chest did. One detail I do like a lot is that Grimmjow, although his hands have a human appearance here, has dark claw-like fingers. Again, perhaps a partial reference to Pantora, though actually I think maybe more likely to be a reference to the fact that Grimmjow gained the ability to partially release his Resurrection in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, as we saw when he chased down Askin. Floating on either side of the Espada are another pair of armoured plates, again adorned with the elbow blades from his Resurrection, while pink flames of energy leak from the markings on his eyes, giving him a very divine appearance, although in my opinion this is also what feels the most similar to the Hogyoku enhanced forms of old. It's kind of the same as the ring of green fire that I didn't mention with Ulquiorra. That's very similar to how the Hogyoku enhanced forms used to be. The pair of almost teardrop-like markings under his eyes are maybe a reference to the bullets that he can shoot from his arms in Resurrection, or maybe not. Interestingly, Grimmjow's design seems to go in the opposite direction to Ulquiorra's. Where Ulquiorra has lost himself more and more to the darkness, here Grimmjow's exposed torso, arms, and face, as well as the overall colour scheme, reflect a character who has found the light perhaps more and more, and who has intentionally or not embraced his humanity. The lower half of the design is where things get a little strange to me. In general, I'm not a huge fan of floating, yet disconnected bits and pieces of a design, as that's where things start to look a little messy, as though they've been added in for the sake of it. But I do like the, again, quite regal-looking tunic here. It's very weird to me that despite the effort that's gone into his segmented gown and his armor-plated legs, which again feel like a callback to Pantora, Grimmjow just has his regular Arankar shoes on. Honestly, it's so jarring as to look quite weird to me, but again I wonder if it's simply meant to showcase that he hasn't quite gone as far as Ulquiorra. Grimmjow's special ability in this form is Golpe Ruinoso, or Ruinous Blow, and it's quite unusual for him. He gathers a vast amount of energy in the air above, before condensing it into what almost looks like a black hole. Leaping into the air and then grabbing the orb of power in his hand, Grimmjow then drives it down into the ground beneath him, where it explodes in a gigantic cataclysmic blast of energy that looks a little reminiscent of Full Hollow Ichigo's Sero. Considering this ability vaguely resembles a Sero in origin in general, I'm kind of assuming the idea here is the purple colour of this power comes from a fusing of Grimmjow's normal Sero, which is red, and his Gran Ray Sero, which is blue, but of course that's total speculation. On the whole, Grimmjow's is another cool Soul Ascension form. It's not my favourite, and I don't feel like it comes together quite as cohesively as some of the others, but it's still great to see. It's kind of funny, I also wasn't particularly hot on his Hogyoku form either. That was one of my least favourites, so at least this does look better than that. I appreciate the attempt to make him look more regal, keeping the form in line with Grimmjow's desire to be viewed as a king, and so maybe this new power has kind of granted him that, or maybe this look comes as a result of him achieving that goal. But I think that's about it for Ulquiorra and Grimmjow's new forms in Bleach Brave Souls. They're both really cool and great new additions to the hopefully growing series of Soul Ascension transformations. Ulquiorra's may be my favourite original design he's ever had, and if I had to rank the 4 Soul Ascension forms right now, it would go Ulquiorra, then Rukia, then Ichigo, then Grimmjow. But again, they're all good in their own way. Again, what's most exciting about this potential series is the idea that if Soul Ascension means it can genuinely apply to anyone, then it would be great to see some characters who aren't either the captains or the Espada getting some time in the spotlight. And I think I said that in the last video, and then they went and gave us the 2 most popular Espada, so... I mean, right now, Brave Souls is clearly sticking to the tried and true favourites. So I'd like to see them go off the beaten path at least a little bit. Give us some of the fan favourites from the other races. Give me some Sternritter or some Fullbringers. Soul Ascension, Ginjo, Tsukishima, Riruka, they would all be fantastic. Soul Ascension, Askin, Asnod, Bambietta. I'd love to see all that sort of thing, so please make it happen. And hopefully, we don't have to wait until the 12th anniversary to see whatever they've got planned next. In fact, I think some people are expecting perhaps the next Soul Ascension forms to come fairly soon, and for them to maybe be Aizen and Yuhabak. I have no idea how much truth there is to that, no idea how legitimate an idea that is, but that would be amazing. Yuhabak in particular could get really crazy, and if that is the case, I can't wait to see it. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video, looking at the newest godly forms for Ulquiorra and Grimmjow found in Bleach Brave Souls, which is celebrating its 11th anniversary, which does feel, frankly, kind of incredible for a game like this. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts on the new forms down in the comments below. Whose do you prefer? Which of the 4 Soul Ascension forms so far is your favourite? Do let me know your thoughts. I'd love to read them all. Consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already for more Bleach videos just like this. Maybe not quite like this, I guess, but more Bleach videos every single week, especially with the 1000-Year Blood War arc Core 4 literally a few days away. Excitement is building. Check out my full anime recap to get yourself caught up before the newest episodes drop, and also consider supporting us on Patreon as well, where your support goes a very, very long way, and it does help out enormously. So thank you to everyone supporting over there, going the extra mile. It is greatly, greatly appreciated. Alright everyone, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.